Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
Thank you, Theo. For those of you who don't know Theo, he's actually a very amazing, intelligent man. So if you ever want to have a really fun conversation, go chat to him. Genuinely, not a joke. Also, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to go a little bit deeper than I usually would in this little communion talk, and then we're going to stand and sing another song. And I wrote it down because I'm terrible at actually having to use my own words rather than just singing the lyrics. So, over the last few years, I have been through a great undoing of all I thought I knew to be true, and what is right or wrong or somewhere in between. The truth used to be very black and white, and yet now it seems even more grey than I thought possible. When we come to the table at the end of the service, it can be a time to reflect on how our life experiences have shaped us to be beautifully different people. So I wrote a poem about this part of my life because the primary school version of me is vastly different to the teenage version, the adult version, the adulter adult version, and I hope that I continue to level up in life. We think so differently, you and I. Not wrong or right, just reasons why. Our roots run deep in separate ground, with different echoes and different sound. A childhood here, a trial there, each story written, none compare. Through joy and pain, through loss, through fight, we each see shadows, we each see light. And my story's hard to tell. I grew up trapped inside a shell, a cult to find what I should be, what I could think and what I could see. But this past year, it's come undone. The lies unravel one by one. I've questioned all I thought was true, and I faced a world I never knew. It's disorientating, raw and deep, a tearing down that makes me weep, yet in the breaking I can find a freer heart and a clearer mind. So when our views don't quite align, it isn't error, yours or mine. It's just the lens that we look through, shaped by the life that carried you. And isn't it a wondrous thing, the colours all our stories bring? Together, threads both bold and small, we weave a beauty in it all. So pause before you draw the line between your world and theirs and mine. For in our difference we can see a richer, deeper tapestry.
I'm going to need a whiteboard. We are starting a series that I'm actually really nervous about. So we're going to spend the next few weeks in a part of the Bible that most of us avoid. And I'll show you a Bible here. I've actually got a real one. And there's this section kind of in the middle. It makes up nearly a quarter of your Bible. And I definitely don't go to this part of the Bible very quickly or very often. This is the section that we call the prophets. And today I'm going to talk from one of the prophets called Hosea, but I want you to know about the prophets that this is not a safe space to go and step into or to read at a surface level. Because the prophets are dark, they are difficult, and they are dangerous. I think we're going to put a slide up to remind you. I do alliterate, so they're dark because the prophets are written in a period of Israel's history that we loosely call the exile, which makes it sound like it was one event, but it's actually a series of events. They cover a period of about 200 years where there were waves of exile. And this is a dark, traumatic time for God's people. They were swept up in a very violent time as empires around them rose to power. And in waves, they came and overpowered God's people, and they forcibly removed people from their home and scattered them violently across the known world. And people lost their home, they lost their families, they lost their identity, and they lost their sense of who they were in God. And so the prophets are asking big questions. How did we get here? What have we done wrong? Where is our God? What is our God like? Who are we? How do we make sense of any of this? And so the prophets are dark because they're full of dark, cosmic, violent imagery. They're difficult to read. Now, the whole Bible is difficult to read, so don't ever underestimate how complex it is as a document. It's written in a different time and place, in different languages, different culture, and we are thousands of years removed, and so it's always going to be difficult for us to read. But the prophets in particular, you cannot read them without the literary context, the historical context, and the spiritual context. So in order to even begin to read the prophets, you first of all need to be soaked in the language and imagery of Genesis and Exodus. You've got to understand the story of what went before. So you need that context of that great rescue story in Exodus. You've also got to understand the historical context. So if you really want to read the prophets, you also first have to start with Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, and understand what was happening at the time. But the prophets are still not going to make sense to us as Christians unless we are soaked in the Gospels and the understanding of what Jesus did and who he was, and how the writers of the New Testament viewed the prophets and looked at things through that lens and saw the messianic hope within it. So please don't just jump into the prophets without already either having a really solid knowledge of the rest of your Bible or having a friendly Bible nerd who's going to help you walk through it. And that could be someone in our community. It could be through books, it could be through podcasts, it could be through scholarship. But don't just risk it and jump in there, because my last point is it's dangerous. The prophets are dangerous because a lot of bad theology has crept into our belief systems from a poor reading of what the prophets are saying. Because unfortunately, a lot of people have a portrait of God that does not look like Jesus. They see the God of the prophets as angry and cruel and vindictive and judgmental, while Jesus is loving and forgiving, and they don't look like each other. They see God as the bad cop and Jesus as the good cop, and they don't look like each other. They see a God who is so angry at us that he demands blood sacrifice and makes Jesus take that place, and they don't look like each other. And bad theology can and has crept in, and well-meaning pastors have preached sermons because it's very powerful to be frightened of an angry God and run into the arms of a loving Jesus. But it leaves scars and it leaves problems in our theology because the portraits we have of God determine how we treat other people. And when that comes from within the church, and we've got a lot of unlearning to do, that leads us to very dark and dangerous places. So I just want to put it out there that a shallow surface reading of the prophets can be, and has been for many people, dangerous. And it's caused me grief, actually. Preparing this sermon, I've been really confronted, because I'm looking at the story of Hosea, and I've been really confronted. I've gone online and read a lot of modern commentators who see very ugly pictures of God in this text, who are reading at a surface level and are questioning whether God is actually an abusive and violent husband and father. And so realising that this was going to fall on Father's Day, this actually really worried me, and I had to really spend a lot of time sitting with that and sitting with the pain of acknowledging that it is true that people see God that way. Our hearts are always leaning towards mistrusting God, right from the garden when the snake whispered in Eve's ear, "Did God really say?" Our hearts have always had a tendency to mistrust God. So, I wanted to start with that warning. Who are the prophets? So next slide. We're going to spend the next 6 weeks talking about the prophets, so I want you to kind of have a feel for who the prophets are. Now, the prophets are provokers. The prophets are a really unique role in ancient history, very, very unusual to actually have a recognised role where people are allowed to speak truth to power. We can look at the American administration right at the moment and know what would happen to anybody who speaks truth to power. In all the neighbouring empires and kingdoms, you did not have prophets in the same role, but the Hebrew prophets were recognised as these people who would speak in vivid, shocking, attention-grabbing ways, and they specifically were pointing their message at the leadership. So it was usually the anger and the judgment that you hear from the prophets is usually pointing straight at the political and religious leadership. But it also applies to the people who were also following that leadership as well. So they were provokers. It's meant to be shocking. It's meant to put you through all sorts of uncomfortable emotions. The prophets also give perspective. So they take the same history that's talked about in other books in the Bible, but they peel back that history to look at the spiritual truth that's happening behind it. And they're talking to a rescue story. They're showing how through human history, through events that we can see on a surface level, if you peel back that surface, God is at work. He always has been at work. He has a plan. He's always had a plan. His plan is to rescue us, and he is working through historical events. So having that perspective of there's what I can see and there's what I can't see under it. The prophets bring the pathos of God to us. So there's has anyone heard of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel? He wrote a book called Prophets, and his main point is the prophets draw so close to God that they actually get a sense of his tender heart and his posture towards us and the deep pain and love that he is going through. And so you will find that the prophets are passionate, that they bring all this pathos and they help uncover God's heart towards us. The prophets are poets, and that's really important for us to understand because Hebrew poetry is not a literary form that we are familiar with or comfortable with in our modern day. Apart from the Bible, I bet none of you read ancient Hebrew poetry on a regular basis. And it is full of images and metaphors that are quite bizarre, that you will not recognise easily what they're about unless you really ground yourself in those images and metaphors that come earlier in the Bible. And they were performers. The prophets are a weird bunch of people, honestly. It takes a certain personality type to be a prophet. And the prophets dramatised the details. They lived them out. These were not times where you could write stuff down and send it out on the internet to everybody. They lived the metaphors in front of their neighbours. They did some truly bizarre things, if you read through the prophets, some strange street theatre, and they performed it in front of their audience. So we're talking today about the prophet Hosea. And Hosea was a performer. He lived out the metaphor of God's heart for us when God called him to marry an unfaithful wife and have children with her. So Hosea lives out this metaphor, these two metaphors of God as a father and God as a husband. And the first 3 chapters of Hosea are all about his personal life and his personal pain. And then it springboards off that to talk about God's heart and God's pain towards his wayward bride. So Hosea, just for context, If you're interested in the history of it all, Hosea is one of the few prophets who lived and spoke to the northern kingdom. So after Solomon's reign, Israel split into two halves. There was the northern kingdom, which was far bigger and more powerful, and there was the southern kingdom of Judah. So there's Israel and Judah, and he's one of the few prophets from and speaking to Israel. And he spoke in that time just before that first wave where Assyria came in, where they took over and they forcibly relocated and they scattered the people of Israel. So most of them never to return. So a truly traumatic, devastating part of their history. So he's one of the first prophets, one of the earliest prophets. And Israel at the time were at their worst. Israel, they had their moments where they were beautiful, where they were following Yahweh God, but at the time that Hosea is writing, under Jeroboam II, they are at their worst. And archaeologists and historians actually can tell from that era that there was massive economic inequality, that the rich got richer and the poor got oppressed and mistreated, and that the religious system got really confused. The people of Israel thought that they were worshipping Yahweh God, but they were actually worshipping the Canaanite Baal gods, and they kind of got the two intertwined because the Canaanite gods, the Baals, were way more appealing to worship than Yahweh God. Because you can control the behaviour of the Canaanite gods. You just have to offer bigger and bigger sacrifices to get them to do what you're doing. And they hate the same people that you hate. And they're gods of war, so they're behind you if you want to go smash your enemies, where Yahweh God is way too loving and forgiving and wants you to bless all nations. But there's a pull for the leadership towards the Canaanite gods of their area. There was also, they were fertility gods. And so there was temple prostitution as part of your worship process. And they were angry gods, judgmental gods, violent gods. So if you needed to appease them because they were unpredictable, then you would offer more and more of your precious things, to the point where if you really needed to appease them, you would offer your own child. And this is the portrait of God that they started to believe in, instead of the Yahweh God, beautiful portrait that looks like Jesus. So you can tell why I've been a bit stressed about this sermon and preparing for this, because they're dark images, but there are these two metaphors that we find in Hosea. And the first one is Hosea as a father and God as a father. And the second is Hosea as a husband and God as the husband of a wayward wife. And straight away, these are complicated metaphors for us, because every single one of us knows the pain that can come from broken relationship with parents or with intimate partners. These are deep, these go right to our core, these are utterly human and universal images for us. If we have been well treated by our parents, this is the symbol of the most wonderful love that you will ever experience. But if we've been hurt and broken, it's a source of great pain and mistrust, and same with intimate partner. So these are dangerous metaphors to even start dealing with. And it gets really difficult to read. The first chapter of Hosea is about when God calls him to marry an unfaithful woman, and they have children. And the first child is definitely Hosea's child, and he calls that son Jezreel, which actually sounds a lot like the word Israel if you say it in Hebrew. And Jezreel means scattered. So I'm going to try and draw scattered, like like seed violently scattered and thrown away by a farmer as he's sowing a field. You scatter. And Jezreel is also the name of a place. Kevin, Neil and I got to go there in Israel. It's one of the most fertile places in Israel, but it's also the scene of great violence, and there's memory of much violence there. In fact, has anyone heard of Armageddon? We went there. It's in the middle of the Jezreel Valley. It's an actual place, and so there's violence and scattering. Can you think how cruel a name this is for your child, knowing that Israel is about to be violently scattered? But it gets worse, because the next child is a daughter, and she's given the most horrible name I've ever heard. She is called Not Loved. And as a woman, that causes me pain, to think of a baby girl called Not Loved. And it makes me think of little Lulu, who is definitely loved by all of us, but how awful it is to have a name like that. And then the third child, he calls Not My People. Can you imagine? And I assume that there's a question over the parentage, because we know that this wife is unfaithful. I assume Hosea might not actually be sure if this is his people, but to call a child Not My People. What kind of father does this? And this is why people do get worried about the book of Hosea. Is this a portrait of an abusive father? But I've got some good news for you. Before the words are even out of his mouth, he's changing their names. And in Hosea 2, it says, I will plant her for myself in the land, because Jezreel actually has two meanings. It means scattered, but it also means planted. I will show my love to the one I called Not My Loved One. I will say to those called Not My People, you are my people. And they will say, you are my God. So there is this very public renaming, new names of these children. And if you're reading carefully, you will see this whole naming process harks back to the Exodus story. It harks back to a time when Israel were scattered in the land of Egypt, when they were oppressed in a foreign land, when they were not loved by the Egyptians, but oppressed and mistreated as slaves. When they were not my people, they had no nationhood, no identity as a people. And when God called them out of Egypt and he made them his people and he called them his treasured possession and showed love to them and he planted them in a new land, in their home. So you will see that this tells the past of Israel's history, but it also tells the current of what's happening as they know that the Assyrians are coming. It's just a matter of when, not if, and they're going to be scattered, and the love is going to be taken away from them. They're not going to be loved in the lands that they're placed in. They're not going to have an identity as a people. But God says to them, a time is coming where I will plant you in the land. I will show my love to you. I will say, you are my people, and you will say, you are my God. And it talks about the future of Israel as well. If we look at Hosea chapter 1, verse 11, there's even the promise of the Messiah to come. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together, and they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. And so it actually is speaking of a future hope of the prophets didn't quite know what it was going to look like, but they knew if they followed that plan that God had been showing throughout, that there was going to be someone to come. And we can look back and see who that someone was, but this was a hope. And it turns out that the metaphors of a father and a husband are also deeply rooted in this Exodus story. Now, my dad is here, and he's an obstetrician gynecologist, And I've had 4 children myself, so I'm quite comfortable talking about the topic of childbirth. But I just want to apologise if anybody finds it squeamish, because it turns out that in the Passover story, the story of the first Passover, it is an image, a graphic image of childbirth. And I never saw this until my favourite rabbi, Rabbi David Foreman, talked this through, and he said, you know, in that Passover meal, that first one, they're inside a house and they smear the door frame with blood. And then they burst forth, and then they go through the water. It's all getting a bit icky, isn't it? It is the image of God, not just being father, but also being mother, of giving birth to his firstborn son. There's a whole image of childbirth in that redemption story, where he takes them to Mount Sinai and spends a year there, nurturing them, feeding them. It takes about a year before a child can take their first steps. And then he leads them in the desert for 40 years as they learn to be like their father. But just like a child, they are wayward. They rebel against him. Who here is a parent and their child has taken their first steps? Do you remember that day? Hands up. It's such a sweet, such a beautiful moment, but it is also bittersweet, because the moment they start taking steps, they can walk away from you. They can choose to leave you. And the image in the Exodus story, there are 10 incidents where the people directly rebel against God. But the image of him as father is he keeps coming back. He keeps faithfully teaching them. He keeps throughout every rebellion. And Hosea is in tune with this metaphor of God as a father and of childbirth. So in Hosea 11, some of the most beautiful poetry you'll ever read. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms, but they did not realise it. To them I was like the one who lifts a little child to the cheek, and I bent down to feed them. Ephraim is another name for Israel. It's one of the personal names that God uses when he's talking about Israel as his child. And this is such a bittersweet image, this beautiful portrait of God tenderly loving his child, lifting them by the arms, teaching them to walk, teaching them to take their first steps. And the more independence, the more he gave them, the more they ran away from him. The more they turned to the Canaanite gods, the more they misunderstood who he was, even though he was the one who bent down to feed them. He was the one who lifted them to his cheek. So beautiful, but really complicated and sad and grieving metaphor for his relationship with his people. And then you have in Hosea 2 and 3, again, a super, super uncomfortable, complicated metaphor of Hosea and his wife. And his wife runs off from him to chase other lovers. And, as for those of us who are married, the pain of what that would actually be like is nearly unthinkable. And I just want to say that anybody who has ever used Hosea to tell women that they should stay in abusive relationships needs judgment of some sort. Because that's not what this portrait is meant to be about. But there is this awful story of Hosea's lived pain of the rejection that he's going through. And then in Hosea 2, which I find incredibly hard to read, there's this poetry, which is kind of Hosea's voice, but also God's voice, trying to think through how he should deal with this wife who has shamed him, left him, hurt him. And he goes through these options. And they're not pleasant, because the first option, he says, is I could trap her. I could, hedge her in so that she can't chase after other lovers and she has to come back to me. But if I do that, we're not going to have a relationship. She's just going to, she'll come back, but she will think it's her other lovers who gave her everything, who looked after her, who loved her. So option number 2 is I can shame her. I can take everything away that I've ever given her. I can leave her exposed. I can leave her suffering. But if I do that, she'll run back to her other lovers. She won't want relationship with me. So I've got a third option, and this is the one that he talks about at the end of Hosea 2. Therefore, I am now going to allure her, and I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her, and I'll give her back everything, and I'll look after her and nurture her, take care of her. And in that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. Now, this is much more powerful in the Hebrew because, not that I speak very good Hebrew or anything, but my husband is Ish, my man, my partner, the person that I see as my equal, Ish and Isha. But my master, the word in Hebrew for my master is Baal. It's the same name as the Canaanite gods, and it means master, someone over. And God is saying, I don't want that relationship with you. I want this relationship with you. And then he says really beautiful words in Hosea, at the end of Hosea 2. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will know the Lord. And this metaphor too is grounded in the Exodus story because, again, people who understand the Jewish context a lot better than I do have taught me that whole episode where God takes the people out of Egypt and brings them to Mount Sinai, step by step follows a Jewish wedding ceremony. They are at the mountain, and there's husband and wife, God and his people, and he signs a legal contract as you do in a wedding. We think of it as the 10 Commandments. And then there's a horrific scene where while Moses is up on the mountain, signing the contract, getting ready for the final bit of the wedding, down here at the foot of the mountain, Israel turns to a golden calf, which is a symbol of the Canaanite gods. And literally, that image is meant to be while the groom is coming to the altar, he finds the wife in the act of cheating on him, right there and then. And it's meant to gross us out. It's meant to be shocking. So when Moses breaks those tablets, it's like ripping up the contract. I can't go through with this wedding. I can't marry you, not after that level of betrayal. And he goes back up on the mountain, and God chooses, no, despite what just happened, I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will know the Lord. And that knowing is that intimate love relationship. And so Hosea is living out what happened before at Sinai, and he's reminding God's people, Israel at their messiest, at their darkest, at their grossest, at their most unfaithful, that God is a bridegroom who doesn't give up, who still betroths himself no matter how unfaithful she's been. And so these images truly are a tender love story, a broken, a hurting one full of pain, one full of sadness, with great betrayal, but the love of a parent for their child and the faithful love of a bridegroom who continues to stay faithful to betroth himself. And so these images in the New Testament are fully brought about in Jesus, because the good news is God looks like Jesus. He always has, and he always will. And we didn't always know how much he looked like Jesus, because it wasn't until Jesus fully revealed God. But when we read the Old Testament, we do have these glimpses of the God who looks like Jesus. And Jesus shared a beautiful story of a loving father and a son who ran away from him. And then the son returned, and the father ran down the street and threw his arms around him, even with the stench of the pig pen still on him. And this is the kind of father that you have. And the New Testament talks over and over again as the church, as the bride of Christ, treasured and loved and beautifully loved, and looking forward to the moment where we can fully know God. And the book ends with a wedding and a wedding feast, and it's a really beautiful image. And so this Father's Day, I am actually glad in the end that I got to talk about this book. And my dad is here, and my dad is an image of love and compassion and faithfulness. And Dad, you have always loved us, but also your big heart. We could fill a stadium with the number of people that you have looked after and cared for and treated in the course of your career. And I think you're too compassionate at times, but you show me what God looks like. And my husband, Kevin Neal, we've been married for more than 30 years, and you've raised our 4 children with me, and you treat me like your treasured, precious possession, and you look after me and love me and make me feel beautiful, and thank you for loving me and my children. And when I see Theo carrying baby Lulu, when I see Josh Potter with his beautiful little Joseph, when I see, where's Josh Fernandez, and kids running up to him, or Han when he's looking after his little boys, or Yanni when his boys are climbing all over him, I see images of good men in our church. Andy Longhurst, Dave Longhurst, there's just, good men. And thank you. And if you guys, who are human and broken, can love your children and your spouses in beautiful ways, how much more so can God love and look after us?
How good was that message? Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at Westcity, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.